The alpha buried his mate alive, not in sorrow, not in madness, in silence. I remember the sound of dirt hitting my chest before I remember anything else about that night. Not screams, not thunder, just dirt. Cold, heavy, final. I had been Luna for less than a year. I had loved him longer than that. And in the end, love meant nothing when the council whispered the word weak into his ear one time too many. They said I couldn't carry his heir. They said the bond was a mistake the moon goddess herself regretted. They said a Luna, who could not give the pack a future, had no right to stand beside its alpha. And Alpha Draven Voss believed them. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Celine Ashgrove. I was not born powerful. It is the moon goddess. I was not born chosen. I was simply a healer's daughter who fell in love with the wrong wolf at exactly the right moment in his life, and the wrong moment in mine. For 3 years, Draven made me believe I was enough. For 3 years, I watched him rule with a steady hand and a colder heart than I ever wanted to admit. I told myself the coldness was armor. I told myself somewhere beneath it was still the boy who once carried me on his back through a snowstorm because my legs were too small to keep up. I was wrong. Because the night the healers confirmed what the council had feared, Draven did not come to comfort me. He came with 4 guards, a shovel, and a silence I will never forget. "Forgive me," he said. Only that. 2 words and then nothing. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was his back. Not his face. His back. Walking away. That image lived inside me longer than the pain did. I do not remember dying. I remember waking. Beneath the earth, in a wooden box meant to end me quietly, something ancient stirred inside my blood. Something that had been sleeping since before I was born. A voice, older than the forest itself, whispered a single sentence into the marrow of my bones. "You were never meant to die in the dark, little wolf. You were meant to rise in the light." The wood around me cracked. Not from my fists, from the light spilling out of my own skin. Silver. Blinding. Alive. I clawed my way upward through soil that should have crushed me, through roots that should have trapped me, through a grave that should have kept its promise. And when I broke the surface, gasping under a moon that had somehow turned from silver to gold, I understood one truth with a certainty that terrified me more than the burial itself. I had not survived by accident. I had been chosen. For 5 years, no one in Crescent Hollow Pack knew that Celine Ashgrove still breathed. For 5 years, I lived a different life, under a different name, learning things no ordinary wolf was ever meant to learn. I trained with wolves who had no pack, no alpha, no allegiance to any throne. I studied under an old seer who had spent decades tracking bloodlines the moon goddess herself had marked before history began erasing them. And every single night, in the quiet hour before dawn, I dreamed the same dream. A crown made of moonlight, a voice calling me home, and the sound of dirt hitting a coffin that would never bury me again. I did not return to Crescent Hollow for revenge. I want you to understand that clearly, because revenge is easy, and revenge is empty, and revenge was never what called me back. I returned because something inside that pack was dying slowly, the way a body dies when the heart forgets how to beat with conviction. I returned because the wolves who had once bowed to fear deserved to see what happens when the person they buried walks back through the front gate wearing a crown they never believed existed. And I returned because Draven Voss, the alpha who had walked away from my grave without looking back, was about to learn that some bonds do not end when you bury the person wearing them. Some bonds simply wait. The morning I returned, the sky over Crescent Hollow was unusually still. No wind.
No weird sun.
Only silence, thick enough to feel against the skin. The guards at the outer gate did not recognize me at first. Why would they? The woman standing before them wore silver armor etched with symbols older than their pack's founding. Her eyes carried a light no ordinary wolf possessed. Her presence made even seasoned warriors take an involuntary step backward. It was only when I lowered my hood that the eldest guard dropped his spear entirely. "Luna Celine," he whispered, voice trembling. "You're supposed to be dead." "I was," I said simply. "And now I am not." Word spread through the pack faster than fire through dry grass. By midday, every wolf in Crescent Hollow had gathered near the central courtyard, the very place where, 5 years earlier, I had been dragged away in the dead of night while most of them slept, unaware that their Luna was being carried to a grave dug in secret. Some wolves wept when they saw me. Some fell to their knees without being asked. Others simply stared, unable to reconcile the woman standing before them with the frightened, broken Luna they remembered. And then Draven arrived. I watched him walk through the crowd the way I remembered him walking through my grave 5 years earlier.
Steady, composed,
unreadable. But when his eyes finally met mine, something in his composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for me to see it. "Celine," he said, and his voice broke on the second syllable of my name. "You're alive." "No thanks to you," I answered. The courtyard fell into a silence, so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to, because the crown resting upon my head, forged from moonlight itself, began to glow the moment those words left my lips, and every wolf present understood exactly what it meant. The moon goddess had not simply spared me.
She had crowned me.
Draven took one step forward. "Let me explain." "You had 5 years," I said quietly. "You had 5 years to search for me, to mourn me, to question what you had done. Instead, the pack tells me you simply continued ruling as though nothing happened." His jaw tightened. "I searched for you longer than you know." "Did you search beneath the earth where you left me?" He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. I turned to address the pack instead, because whatever remained between Draven and me was no longer the only truth that mattered here. 5 years ago," I said, loud enough for every wolf to hear, "I was buried alive because a group of elders decided a Luna's worth could be measured only by what she could give a bloodline, not by what she carried in her heart. Tonight, I want every wolf standing in this courtyard to understand something clearly. That decision did not end me. It revealed exactly who deserved to lead you and who never did." A murmur rippled through the crowd, quiet at first, then growing, because they all remembered the elders who had whispered those poisonous words into Draven's ear. Because many of them had stayed silent while it happened, too afraid to speak against a council that ruled through fear rather than wisdom. An older elder, one of the very voices who had condemned me 5 years earlier, stepped forward from the crowd, his face pale. "Impossible," he muttered. "The grave was sealed. The ritual was." He stopped himself. Too late. Every wolf in the courtyard heard the word he had let slip. "Ritual." I stepped toward him slowly, and for the first time since my return, I allowed the full weight of the crown's light to fill the courtyard. "Ritual," I repeated. "You did not simply order my burial, because I could not bear a child. You buried me because of what you feared I might become if I lived long enough to understand my own bloodline." The elder's face drained of what little color remained. "You knew," I said, quiet and certain. "You knew exactly what slept inside me." Draven turned toward the elder, disbelief and fury warring across his face. "Is this true?" The elder said nothing, which was answer enough. I watched something break inside Draven in that moment, the same way something had broken inside me the night he walked away from my grave. Because for 5 years, he had believed he ordered the death of a Luna who could not bear him an heir. In truth, he had ordered the death of a woman the ancient bloodlines had marked as the rightful bearer of the moon goddess's crown, a woman more powerful, more essential to the pack's survival than any of them had ever imagined. The elders had not feared my weakness. They had feared my strength. That night, beneath a moon that had turned from silver to gold the moment I rose from my grave, the true story finally began to surface, thread by careful thread. I learned that the ritual used to determine whether a Luna was fit to remain by an alpha's side had been altered generations earlier by a hidden faction within the council, a faction terrified of ancient bloodlines resurfacing and threatening the fragile order they had built. I learned that my own mother, a quiet healer who had died when I was young, had once carried the very same mark now glowing upon my wrist, and that her death had never been the illness everyone claimed it was. I learned that Draven himself had been deceived just as thoroughly as I had been betrayed, manipulated by advisors who understood exactly which fears to plant and exactly when to let them grow. None of this excused what he had done, but it explained why the wolf who once carried me through a snowstorm had become a man capable of walking away from a grave without looking back. Fear, when cultivated carefully enough, can turn even gentle hands into instruments of cruelty. Over the following days, Crescent Hollow existed in a state suspended between two truths. The pack now knew their Luna had returned, crowned by forces far older than their own council. And their Alpha now knew he had been used as a weapon against the very woman the moon goddess had chosen to protect their future. Draven came to me on the third night, alone, without guards, without the composed mask he wore during daylight hours. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "Good," I answered, "because I haven't decided whether you deserve it." He accepted that without argument, which surprised me more than I wanted to admit. "Tell me the truth," I said instead. "When they told you I couldn't bear an heir, did you believe that alone was reason enough to end my life?" His silence stretched long enough that I nearly turned away. "No," he finally admitted. "I believed the council when they told me you had begun changing. That something inside you had grown dangerous. That if I didn't act quickly, you would become a threat to the entire pack. And did you ever ask me?"
No.
"Did you ever look at me and see anything other than what they told you to see?" His voice cracked on the answer. "I saw my mate. I saw the woman who once forgave me for forgetting our anniversary 3 years running. I saw someone I loved enough to be terrified of losing, and terror made me listen to voices I should have silenced the moment they spoke against you." I did not answer immediately, because for the first time since rising from that grave, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything I had lost, not just my life, not just 5 years, but the version of Draven who might have chosen differently if fear hadn't been given so much power over his judgment. "I'm not the same woman you buried," I finally said. "I know, and I'm not certain I want to be." He nodded slowly, understanding settling into his features like exhaustion after a long war. "Then let me earn whatever version of you chooses to remain."
I did not answer him that night.
Some wounds require more than a single conversation to close, and I was no longer willing to offer forgiveness simply because it was expected of me. The following weeks tested Crescent Hollow in ways the pack had never experienced. The council, exposed and cornered, attempted first to discredit my return, spreading rumors that the crown upon my head was an illusion crafted through dark magic rather than a gift granted by the moon goddess herself. When that failed, several elders attempted to flee the territory entirely, taking with them scrolls and records detailing exactly how deeply the ritual corruption had spread through generations of pack leadership. I did not chase them. I did not need to, because the moment they crossed beyond Crescent Hollow's boundary, the ancient wards embedded into the land itself, wards tied directly to the bloodline now glowing beneath my skin, refused to let them leave freely. The forest does not forget its rightful guardians, even when its people do. One by one, the fleeing elders were returned to the courtyard, not through force, but through roots that wrapped gently around their ankles and vines that guided them back the way lost children are guided home by instinct rather than direction. The pack watched in stunned silence as the very land they lived upon revealed its loyalty. Not to a council built on fear, not to an alpha who once acted without question, but to whatever ancient promise had been sealed into that soil long before any of them were born. By the final week of my return, the truth had spread far beyond Crescent Hollow's borders. Neighboring packs sent emissaries to witness the Luna who had risen from her own grave, crowned by moonlight, protected by a forest that answered to bloodlines older than any modern council. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of fear, uncertain whether the ancient order stirring within Crescent Hollow might soon demand answers of their own hidden corruptions. And a few came seeking something far simpler.
Hope.
Because for centuries, packs across the region had lived beneath councils that ruled through quiet intimidation, beneath alphas who mistook control for strength, beneath traditions no one questioned because questioning them had always come at too high a cost. My survival, impossible as it seemed, cracked open a door that had remained sealed for generations. If a woman buried alive for the crime of being not enough could rise wearing a crown granted by the moon goddess herself, what other truths had been buried alongside her? What other silences deserved to be broken? On the final night of my return, beneath the same moon that had turned gold the moment I clawed free of my grave, the pack gathered once more in the courtyard, this time not out of fear or shock, but out of genuine reverence. The corrupted elders faced formal judgment, stripped of their positions, sentenced to spend the remainder of their lives repairing the very trust they had spent decades dismantling.
No executions.
No cruelty disguised as justice. Only accountability, delivered with a steadiness I had learned from surviving 5 years in the company of wolves who valued wisdom over vengeance. Draven stood before the gathered pack and did something no alpha in Crescent Hollow's history had ever done. He knelt, not beside his throne, not before the council.
Before me.
I failed the woman I promised to protect, he said, voice carrying across the silent courtyard. I let fear make decisions that love should have made instead. I cannot undo what happened beneath that soil 5 years ago, but I can promise, in front of every wolf who calls this pack home, that I will spend whatever years remain proving that promise was not empty. I studied him for a long moment, remembering the boy who once carried me through a snowstorm, remembering the alpha who once walked away from my grave without looking back, understanding finally that both versions of him were true, and that healing did not require forgetting either one. Rise, I finally said.
He did.
I am not returning to stand beside a throne, I told him, loud enough for the entire courtyard to hear. I am returning to make certain no wolf in this pack, or any pack watching tonight, ever mistakes silence for safety again. The crown upon my head flared with brilliant silver light, and for the first time since my return, the ancient voice that had called me from my grave 5 years earlier spoke once more, not just within my own mind, but across the entire valley, felt by every wolf gathered beneath that gold-tinted moon. The buried queen has risen. Let no throne built on fear stand unquestioned again. In the years that followed, Crescent Hollow became known not for the cruelty once hidden within its council, but for the honesty demanded by the Luna who had survived being buried alive and returned wearing a crown no ritual could have granted a woman deemed unworthy. Draven ruled beside me, not above me, learning slowly what it meant to lead through partnership rather than command. The forest that once wrapped its roots around fleeing elders became known throughout the region as the Guardian Wood, a living reminder that some lands remember justice even when the people walking upon them forget. And the story of the Luna who rose from her own grave spread far beyond Crescent Hollow's borders, whispered in packs that had never met me, told to pups who had never known a world where silence protected cruelty rather than exposing it. Because that is the truth this story carries. The same truth I whispered to myself in the darkness beneath that soil 5 years ago, before the light broke through and the earth gave me back to the world it once tried to take me from. Being buried does not mean being finished. Being underestimated does not mean being powerless. And sometimes, the very people who believe they have silenced you forever are the ones who end up kneeling before the voice they tried hardest to bury. If this story moved you, we would love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Celine's place? Would you have chosen to forgive Draven? Or would you have walked away from him entirely, crown and all? Share your answer in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspective might be exactly what another listener needs to hear tonight. If you enjoyed this journey, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next cinematic werewolf romance. And if you thought this story stayed with you long after it ended, wait until you hear the next one, because the next tale begins with a single sentence that changes everything. She was born an Omega, they discarded at birth. Until the night the entire Lycan Council knelt and called her the last living empress. Until next time, thank you for listening, and may you never mistake silence for weakness again.